Well, hey there, Saddle Pals, and welcome to another episode of SCV in the Movies. I'm E.J. Stevens.
And I'm Bill West.
And tonight we have the great honor of interviewing a great guy who just happens to be the grandson of Hollywood legend Joel McCrea.
His name is Wyatt McCrea.
So hang tight with us and we'll be right back with Wyatt McCrea on SCV in the Movies. Well, welcome back, everybody, to SCV in the Movies.
We're your show about movies and entertainment with a Santa Clarita Valley connection.
And the really great thing about tonight's guest is his grandfather has a great big Santa Clarita Valley connection, several of them. And I think you have a few yourself. We have the great pleasure of meeting and talking with Wyatt McCrea, Joel McCrea's grandson. Thank you very, very much for being here.
It's a pleasure to be here. It's great to be with you guys this evening.
Yeah, we've been trying this for a long time. It's great that we could finally get all parties together here.
Better late than never.
That's right. That's right. So let's just set the table now. Let's talk about your grandfather a little bit. I mean, big time star, but now we're getting a few decades down the road. So let's just tell everybody, who might. The three people out there who might not remember your grandfather, but let's hear about your grandfather.
Well, like you said, as time goes by, there's fewer and fewer people that remember. But my grandfather was really big during the golden age of Hollywood. He started his career in the late 20s and went all the way into the 70s. So he had an over 50-year career, and he made over 95 films as a leading man. Most people remember him for his westerns, obviously, which about half of his career was strictly westerns. But the first half of his career was a lot of comedy and drama. You know, back then when you were under contract to the studio, you kind of did what you were told to do. And when you were starting out, you did a lot of little slapstick dramas and comedies and that sort of thing. But then when he got to the point where he could kind of dictate a little bit more about what he wanted to do, westerns was his gig, So,
that was his thing from the get-go, even before he became an actor.
That's right. That's right. Well, his boyhood dream was to always have a ranch and become a rancher, So,
really?
So when he started making westerns, he said, going to make a movie with putting his boots and his hat on was just like, going to play and going to have fun. It wasn't work really. So.
Now he wasn't born on a ranch though. He was born in South Pass.
No,
right?
he was born in South Pasadena. Yeah, and was raised there until he was about 9 years old, and then the family moved to Hollywood. He grew up at 7755 Hollywood Boulevard, which was the corner of Hollywood Boulevard and Nichols Canyon in those days, and that's where Hollywood Boulevard stopped. And they moved over there so his older sister Lois could go to high school, because there was no high school close to their house in those days. So.
So they weren't seeking Hollywood fame.
No.
They
just went there so she could go to school, and that's really where he developed his love of the West, because in those days there were still teamsters coming across the country with teams of horses and wagons. And up Nichols Canyon, there was a spring up there, and those guys would go up and camp, and he would go up there and listen to these guys tell stories about coming across the country and stuff, and it just fascinated him.
It was probably still a dirt road, Hollywood Boulevard.
Oh yeah, it was. Actually, my grandfather as a teenager, when he was about 14 or 15, worked for a farmer in the area that got a contract. He actually drove a team of horses with a Fresno scraper, which was an old type of grader, basically. It just scraped the road. And he actually built what they called the Hollywood Boulevard extension in those days, which was it extended for 2 or 3 miles beyond his house at that point. But he helped build it. So,
how about that?
Yeah, which is kind of cool, actually.
Do you ever go to that part of Hollywood Boulevard and look around and go,
well,
it's changed?
It's a whole different world now, And of course, the house is long gone. It's all commercial property down there now, But it is kind of fun to go down there, and just I had the great pleasure last year of introducing one of my grandfather's films at the Turner Classic Movie Film Festival. And to be in the Chinese theater where he had so many premieres, and it was a great feeling to be in the same place that he had spent so much time.
That must have been really strange for him to live just a few blocks from the Chinese theater, you know, when he was a kid, and then later on, you know, having it premieres there, you know?
You know, the great thing about it, and I tell people, my grandfather really came up with the industry. I don't think he had any choice but to become an actor, you know? When he was a kid, D.W. Griffith was filming Intolerable, a great big picture with a lot of huge sets right down the street from his house. And he would go down and watch him film. You know, one of his first jobs was holding horses for Tom Mix and William S. Hart, who is, you know.
Who's that?
William S. Hart.
Don't recognize that name.
Local Santa Clarita connection here, Newhall, you know.
Yeah.
And
he held their horses.
Yeah, he held their horses. And then later on, my grandfather had a paper route when he was about 12, and there was a gentleman, the Cudahy family, which was a big meatpacking family in Los Angeles. And they had Michael Cudahy, the son of Mr. Cudahy, loved to follow my grandfather around on this paper route. And Mr. Cudahy said, look, can you just, you know, Michael Cudahy was, you know, always wore the suit and everything, one of those kids that wasn't going to get his hands dirty delivering a paper, but he loved to follow my grandfather around on his route. And Mr. Cudahy told my grandfather, if you'll just let him follow you along, you know, you can come over for dinner, we'll have you over for dinner. Well, the Cudahys entertained people like Charlie Chaplin, William S. Hart, people like that. So my grandfather got to meet all these people when he was a young teenager, you know, and that just kind of set the tone, I think, for where his life was going. I mean, like I said, I don't think he had a choice. You know?
What did his parents do?
His dad worked for L.A. Gas and Electric, which is you know, the local L.A. utility company, and was in middle management for them. And his mother was just a housewife. She started out as a teacher before she got married, but then when she got married, she just was raising kids, and which was not uncommon in those days to you know, live at home and be a housewife. So.
So he did grow up with Hollywood. I mean, Hollywood.
He did, yeah. And as a matter of fact, one of the people on his paper route was C.B. DeMille, Cecil B. DeMille, which is a great story in and of itself. Is later on, my grandfather used to always put the paper up on the porch for him when it was raining or something. And Mr. DeMille gave my grandfather a silver dollar, which later on my grandfather took in when he was trying to get into the business. He took it into CB's office after he was under contract for the studio and said, you may remember this. And CB cast him in his next film right after.
Really?
So,
After taking the dollar.
Give me
that back.
But on Union Pacific, which was a huge DeMille film with my grandfather and Barbara Stanwyck, 1939, great picture. If you haven't seen it, it's
a
worth
great
seeing.
film.
But Mr. DeMille introduced my grandfather to all the cast and crew on the first day of filming as my former newspaper boy.
How about that?
Now, I heard a story, and you'll probably debunk it right now, and I'll be disappointed, but EJ and I are both on the Friends of Hart Park Board of Directors.
Right.
I used to give tours up at the mansion, and I didn't let facts get in the way, and I would
Of a good story,
of a good story ever.
Print the legend, right?
Yeah, for the legend.
Your grandfather's picture is there.
That's correct.
And I would point to it and say that they were friends, and that your grandfather used to be William S. Hart's paper boy.
Well, he was. Yeah, that's true.
Good.
William
I
S. Hart
wasn't lying.
had a house down in that same area at the time.
Right,
And
right.
that's he was also on the paper route. So he was there. Yeah.
So he knew
Santa
all these
Clarita Valley
guys.
connection.
Yeah, there you are.
Yeah, he knew all
he
these
knew
guys
all
as
these
a
guys.
teenager, you know.
Wow.
Yeah, which it was a much smaller world in those days, obviously, but to meet those kind of guys at that age, you know, and to watch filming going on around his house, I think it just, you know, it was something that was always kind of in the back of his mind, even though his dream was to become a rancher and have a ranch. You know, he wanted to be a cowboy. But
Not so much an actor, just a cowboy, a real cowboy.
No, and that leads me to another great story is when he went to college at Pomona College, graduated in 28, but it was his college drama professor that told him, if you want to be a rancher, that's great, but he said, you have a little bit of talent. He said, you might be able to make enough money acting to buy that ranch before you're too old to enjoy it.
There you go.
Know?
Great
So
advice.
that's really where he thought, well, maybe that's a good idea, you know. And so
A stepping
where,
stone to
and he
being a ranch owner.
he wasn't sure he had the talent to make it, you know, but that affirmation from his college drama professor really helped push him in the
amazing.
right direction.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
It shows what an effect teachers can have, a good instructor.
And he went to school with Gene Wood, who Sam Wood was her father, who was a great director back in those days, and so those connections just kind of came into play. You know, it's.
Why was he holding horses for the actors? Was he particularly a horseman, or?
No,
That
he happened to be on the set, and they needed somebody to hold the horses, and he was there. He said, "I'll do it," you know. And he had been around horses. His older sister was the one that got him on a horse,
Okay.
you know, when he was about 9 years old. And the horse ran away with him. He fell off, and he didn't want to have anything to do with the horse. And his older sister said, "You got to get right back on the horse. That's the only way you'll get over it." So he got back on, and everything was from then on. He loved horses, you know.
Classic.
But so he had a little bit of knowledge of, you know, how to hold a horse, which wasn't that hard really. But yeah.
So, yeah, as you were saying at the beginning, he's known for Westerns
Right,
primarily,
yeah,
but
yeah.
he made some great non-Western films. Like, my favorite is Sullivan's Travels.
Well, Sullivan's Travels
Yeah.
was great. You know, the 40s, the decade of the 40s was great for my grandfather.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he did Sullivan's Travels, The More the Merrier, Palm Beach Story, Foreign Correspondent,
He
which
had
was a
range.
Hitchcock film. I mean, oh yeah,
He had
some great
range, yes.
People forget that about my grandfather, and you know, he didn't seek the limelight, and I think from a remembered standpoint, that probably kind of hurt him some, because you know, he was never, when he was at the ranch, that's where he wanted to be. You know, he was at home, but he was never out there seeking publicity promoting himself. Exactly. You know, like a lot of actors were, but people forget the range that he had. He really had a fantastic range. He could do comedy with the best
Yeah,
of them.
absolutely.
I mean, you know, Preston Sturges.
Preston Sturges, yeah.
who did Sullivan's Travels. It's just, you know, he wrote some of those for my grandfather, with my grandfather
Really?
in mind, which blew my grandfather away. You know, when he first read that, he said, "That'd be great for Coop," and he said, "No, I wrote it for you."
Is that right?
Oh, wow. I have to ask,
it's-
speaking of movie titles, when you were at Turner Classic Movie Film Festival, what movie were
Palm
you-
Beach Story, yeah,
Beach Story, okay.
which was a great
Okay.
one, yeah,
Wow.
yeah. Rudy Valley, and it was a great cast and great comedy. I mean, yeah.
Now, your grandfather and grandmother, she was also an actress.
My
and-
grandmother was, Frances D. was her
Yeah.
name, yeah.
So how did they meet initially?
Well, initially they met down at the beach. My grandmother was doing a photo shoot for the upcoming swimsuit line that was coming out in the summer. They used to photograph those in the winter, you know, and so she was down at the beach freezing, and my grandfather was down there playing beach volleyball, which he loved to do on his off time.
Wow.
You know, he was either body surfing or playing beach volleyball. But the photographer happened to notice my grandfather, and my grandfather had done a few films, so you know, he kind of had a little bit of a name, and the photographer asked the girls, "You want to go meet Joel McCrea?" And my grandmother wasn't really all that impressed, you know. She said she went over there, you know, they took a few photos together and whatnot, but then they ended up doing a few films together, you know. And, they did, The Silver Cord was the first one that they did together, and they kind of got to know each other a little bit more. Then they did One Man's Journey, which came out the same year they were married, but earlier in the year, and that's really where the romance started to blossom, yeah. And then
And they got married in what year?
1933, October of 1933.
And they were together for the next
57 years.
57 years.
My grandfather passed away on the morning of their 57th wedding.
Is that right? Wow.
Yeah, in
Wow.
1990. Yeah.
Now, going back to something you mentioned earlier, do you think that you said he wasn't the type that sought the publicity and all
Right.
that? Do you think that was because of the fact that he kind of grew up around these people and it just was nothing to, or was that just something about him?
Well, I think twofold. I think he wanted to keep himself grounded. He never wanted to get kind of sucked into that whole Hollywood. But I think the reason is because he was raised around that. You know, the Cudahy family and some of those families that he had been around who lived kind of a high society life. You know, he'd seen what that was and what it was all about, and it didn't really interest him to live his life that way, you know. And he always said the ranch was far enough away that they couldn't get to him, but it was close enough he could get to them. You
Gotcha.
know? So that's just kind of. And then once he had my dad and my older uncle, you know, having the kids, he really wanted to stay grounded, or keep them grounded, and keep them kind of out of that Hollywood limelight, so to speak, you know. But it just wasn't important to him to be, you know, pushing himself all the time. He didn't have that kind of an ego. He was a very down-to-earth kind of a person, and he loved what he did. He loved acting, believe me. He loved what he did, but more so he loved the people that he worked with more than anything, I think. Yeah.
Now, what was your grandmother's name? I missed.
Frances D. Yeah.
Frances D.
Yeah.
And I see you have a couple of books about it.
I do.
Okay,
Yeah.
can we take a look at those?
Sure.
We can just hold them up to
You
the
guys
Yeah.
can look at those.
Yeah. Why?
These are these are two books that I put together. This one came out several years ago, about '93 to begin with, and the gentleman that wrote it passed away. I bought the rights to it and completely redid the book, added
Really?
it forward, put all new pictures and some new text in there and that sort of thing. And this one was kind of a work for hire on my grandmother, and I put them together to kind of be a match set, you know. So, and those are available on Amazon. People can find those on Amazon. So.
Beautiful.
I can't wait to read these. This will be fantastic.
I know.
Well,
So,
I brought each of you a copy.
oh, well, thank you. Thank you.
You're
Thank you.
my best friend.
Right, yeah, that's
fantastic.
great. Your grandfather was also incredibly wealthy. I mean, he was very good with his money.
Well, he was that was his Scotch blood, I think.
Okay.
He was pretty frugal, you know, as far as that goes. But he invested wisely, you know. A good friend of his, Will Rogers, who was very close with my grandfather. My grandfather referred to Will as kind of a second father, actually.
Wow.
And my grandfather made a couple of films, played the juvenile lead in a couple of Will's films, and they got to know each other very well and had lunch together every week until Will passed
Is
away
that right?
in the plane
Okay.
crash. But
Yeah.
but Will was the one that told him, you need to save half of everything you make, you know, and he said, buy land. He said that, you know, it's a famous quote of Will's, but it was in my grandfather's case, he actually told him, buy land because they're not making any more of it, you know, and he did. And my grandfather, as I said earlier, his dream was to have a ranch, you know, and when he finally kind of got to the point where he thought he could afford to start looking around, you know, he looked south and east all around LA, and he had a friend whose dad was a banker, and his friend heard my grandfather was looking, and he said, well, my dad just took back a ranch in foreclosure, or they're about to foreclose on it, and it's out in the Conejo Valley near Thousand Oaks. Nobody knew Thousand Oaks in those days. It wasn't even a town yet, but Jungle Land was out there, you know,
Right.
and some of those things, and so he said, well, I'll go look at it, and he just fell in love with it, and he ended up buying that ranch. And Will came out and looked at it after my grandfather bought it and said, well, I won't have to worry about you now. He said, if you don't make it as an actor, you can grow a garden and have a milk cow. He said, at least I'll know you'll eat. So,
There you go. Yeah. Well, this is absolutely fantastic. We're going to take a break. We'll come back and we'll talk about your life and your family and the ranch and all that.
Sure.
We'll be back in just a couple minutes with Wyatt McCrea here on SCV in the Movies.
Hey, Adelina, how are you? Hi, Meals on Wheels. I'm Marco. I'm a college student and I volunteer as a driver for Meals on Wheels. I'm very happy I did it. I think it's awesome meeting these people. I mean, they're so interesting. They've had so many wonderful experiences in life. You can tell when you go to see them how eager they are to share their experiences and their wisdom with you. I can see my grandparents in some of these seniors, and you know, when I think about what I want for them, if they lived alone and didn't have anybody to look after them or help them get food, you know, I'd want someone there who does what I do to make sure they're being fed. Your community helps to raise you up into the person that you become. Meals on Wheels is a great way to give back to that community.
Well, we're back on SCV in the Movies. I'm E.J. Stevens here with Bill West, and we have the great pleasure of meeting with Wyatt McCrea, Joel McCrea's grandson. Wyatt, before break, we were talking about your grandfather's ranch.
right.
Now, your father, okay, how many children did your grandfather have?
They had three boys.
Three
yeah,
boys.
My grandmother had three boys. Yeah, Jody, the oldest, and then my dad. They were a year apart. And then my youngest uncle, Peter, was 20 years younger than my father. So
20 years.
He and I are closer in age than he is to his own brother.
Really?
So, yeah, yeah, he came along a little later on.
So they had the two brothers, Jody and David. David
yeah,
is your
yeah.
father.
David
okay.
is my father, yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
so Jody now was an actor.
Jody became an actor, later became a rancher as well, but he always wanted to be an actor. You know, he obviously had big shoes to follow in you know, trying to keep up with my grandfather. But he did several parts in some of my grandfather's movies. And then Jody is probably best remembered for the beach movies that he did. You know, Beach Blanket Bingo, How to Stuff a Wild Bikini, Pajama Party, Muscle Beach Party, all those. You know, he did about a half a dozen of those. So, and, which he loved doing them at the time. He said they were a lot of fun at the time, but he kind of got stereotyped, you know, and it was a little bit hard for him to break out later on. But yeah, he acted up until into the late 60s, early 70s, somewhere in there. So yeah, and then he became a rancher in New Mexico, which is where my father lives, actually, down in New Mexico. So,
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So your father was David.
Yeah, my dad was David. His nickname growing up was Barney because he was always at the barn.
Okay.
He loved being around horses and cattle and just being around the animals. And of course, growing up, kind of exposed to both worlds, you know, growing up on the ranch, but my grandfather was still very active as an actor in those days, so he kind of got to see a lot of the Hollywood side, and he and Jody were on the set with my grandfather a lot in the early days, but he saw a lot of negativity, you know, to the Hollywood side of things, and while my grandmother always said he was the best actor of the bunch, you know, my dad didn't want to have anything to do with Hollywood. He wanted to go the ranching route, and that's what he did. So that's the way I was raised, on a ranch as well. So yeah.
Okay.
Did you have any desire to get into acting following the family?
Hey, I have done a few things, and I was fortunate enough. My grandfather was still making a few things while I was, you know, we were together. I was with him on the set a few times, so that was great, and we had a lot of fun doing that. But
You have the look for the part. You certainly should.
no, I've done a lot of commercials. I was on an episode of a series called Call 911. Did a movie with Buck Taylor called Canyon Trail not too long ago. And for those of you that remember Buck Taylor, who was newly on Gunsmoke, so that was a lot of fun. So, and I just finished producing a film that was released last year, a documentary on the rodeo cowboy Casey Tibbs. If anybody remembers Casey Tibbs, he was on the cover of Life magazine back in the 50s and kind of put modern rodeo on the map. And we've had a great deal of success with it. We've been to 21 festivals now, and we've won Best Documentary out of about half of those. So all the way from New York to San Luis Obispo.
Is that right? Okay.
Yeah,
Wow,
so
we got to get him
great.
on the show with his movies.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
It actually just won a Wrangler Award from the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum, which will be presented in a couple of weeks back in Oklahoma City. So,
Okay,
yeah, so
okay.
We're very excited about
Yeah.
that.
Wow.
It's been great. And,
So, were you ever? Your grandfather filmed up here in the SCV.
right, yeah.
Were you ever on set with him up here?
Not up here, I wasn't. No. The last picture I was on set with him was a movie called Mustang Country, which was kind of a Disney-ish type movie, which was shot up in Canada, actually, just outside of Banff, Canada, which is a
Beautiful
story,
place.
Yeah, beautiful
Yeah,
country. Yeah, and it's a story of he and an Indian boy chasing a wild stallion around. You know, one of those kind of family type fairs, which was a lot of fun. Yeah. But the last time I saw my grandfather on a horse was he was doing a commercial for kind of a local cause in our area, the Thousand Oaks Civic Arts Plaza, and that was the last time he was on a horse in front of the camera, which was at the ranch. They filmed it at his ranch, so you know I was there with him, and it was a lot of fun just to see him on the horse because that was probably about 6 months before he passed away, and he hadn't been on a horse probably in 4 or 5 years.
Really?
But when he got on that horse, it was. All of
He
a sudden,
became 10 again,
all
right?
of a sudden he
Yeah.
got strong, and that horse didn't want to go the way, and he was like, "We're going this way." You know? And it was really great to see him just get energized again, and it was like he'd spent so much time in that saddle. It just took his mind 50 years back, which was great to see. And
that's
yeah.
Now, your grandfather's ranch, he donated a lot of that to.
He donated a lot of it, and then after he passed away, we donated what was left of it to our local park district, which is the Conejo Recreation and Park District in the Thousand Oaks area there, Conejo Valley. And subsequently, we had all the buildings placed on the National Register of Historic Places, so they have federal protection as well.
Fantastic.
And the idea being not only to share he and my grandmother's public life as actors, but also to preserve that California ranching lifestyle, which was huge in that area back in the 40s and 50s and that sort of thing. But so much of it gone now, replaced by shopping centers and houses and that sort of thing.
I was going to say, it's not going to be subdivided now. It's going to be there for.
And that was one of the reasons we did it. There's about 320 acres left of the original ranch, which was about 2,400 acres at its height. And that was our main purpose, not only to preserve the buildings, but to make sure the open space was kept open space and not developed. So,
Good for you. There's a Santa Clarita connection. That's kind of like William S. Hart
That's
did
right.
with his property.
Well,
Just make sure that it stays with the people.
That's right, and I think my grandfather got a lot of those ideas from people like that, from Will Rogers and William S. Hart, people that he looked up to, you know, and for him to give back like that, I think he saw the importance. You know, those guys gave back to the public that helped them become a success, and I think he and my grandmother saw that same thing, and they wanted to be able to give back a little bit too, you know,
Wow.
you know, he and William S. Hart were great friends. You know, my grandfather would come out here on several occasions. I mean, on a regular basis, really. They would get together every so often, and he always said that, you know, he kind of patterned himself after William S. Hart. You know, in the way he approached his Western characters and that sort of thing. Yeah,
Kind of stoic.
Yeah,
And
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You know, kind of play that quiet hero type. You know.
Well, what was your grandfather like, you know, as grandpa?
He was a great guy. I mean, he was, you know, of course, my dad, when I was young, my dad ran ranches for my grandfather on the central coast of California and Nevada as well. And so you know, those were commercial ranching operations. And obviously my grandfather wanted to make sure things were being taken care of. So whenever we were working cattle or doing anything, he was right there with us, you know. So growing up with him, he always expected you to do your job, you know, and to pay attention. And he always said, you know, keep your mouth shut and your ears open, you know. That was kind of the way you learned, you know, with him. And that's the way he raised Jody and my dad, for sure. And in turn, you know, that was passed along to us, but to myself and my siblings. But he was always a lot of fun. He had a big barrel-chested laugh, you know. And if you asked him questions about Hollywood or you know, some of the people he knew, you might as well just sit there for 2 or 3 hours, because he would just roll and roll.
Oh, I wish you had film of all that.
I do.
Oh, do you?
I have film, and I have about 60 hours of him on tape telling stories.
Oh,
So,
wow.
Yeah, I've got some great stuff. Yeah,
Okay.
great stuff. Yeah. But we used to sit, there's a little bunkhouse at the ranch, and it was built in 1890, and it was the only building on the ranch when he bought it. And there was a tree outside there. He used to have a couple of chairs under that tree, and we would just sit there for hours and just listen to him tell stories.
That's great.
You know, and he could tell a story just like nobody else. I mean, he was great.
Were you a fan of the acting profession at that time and looked up to him as an actor, or did you kind of...
You know, it's interesting because I really didn't, I guess I was a slow learner, I don't know, but I really didn't put 2 and 2 together until I was about in the 4th grade. Yeah. And I came to school one day, and my teacher said, "Wow, we really enjoyed seeing your grandfather on TV last night." I thought, what was he doing on TV? You know?
Was he being arrested?
Here, you know? Yeah. And all of a sudden, you know, the light bulb kind of started to go on. I mean, I had known him as a rancher primarily, and he was always with us, like I said, when we were working cattle or doing anything at the ranch. He was very hands-on, so he was right there. But, you know, and I always knew he kind of had this other career, but I never really, you know, understood it all until I, you know, that whole comment kind of got me to thinking about it, you know. And then I started paying attention when we go out to dinner and people would come up and want his autograph. And
right.
I finally figured out what that was all about. But then as I got older and began to appreciate, you know, what he had done on the screen, you know, I mean, you couldn't help but admire him as an actor, I think. I mean, he just...
So did your grandfather have a favorite film of his?
He did. You know, he did many different genres. So, you know, he really liked doing comedies. And, of course, as I mentioned earlier, Westerns were his favorite thing to do when he got to that point. But one of his favorite films was Stars in My Crown, which was a film kind of where he plays a Southern preacher type, but he's not afraid to use his pistols. And it brings into play some of the Ku Klux Klan and some racial issues. Wow. And I think it was something kind of from a spiritual perspective that he could really see himself, a character he could see himself being in real life, you know, and I think he could really relate to that character. And it meant the picture had a great message to it, and that was always very important for my grandfather, to have some sort of a moral message, you know, to his pictures, or he liked to anyway, you know, as much as he possibly could, especially the Westerns. But that was one of his favorites, and if you ever get the chance to see it, it's
I was going to say that one film of his I haven't seen.
So we have homework.
We have homework.
It's out there, and the reason I know a lot about it is because we had it on 16 millimeter, and he had a projector, and when I was a kid, whenever it was raining or we couldn't do something outside, he'd set up the projector and we'd watch that movie.
All right, all right.
So I probably watched it on 16 millimeter 4 times with him in our living room, which was great to hear. The characters, one of the characters in there, Josiah Gray, which is kind of a tongue twister, but and he would always, later in life, he'd always say Josiah. He remembered that character. So yeah, it was great. But he always. He always said he liked to play characters that he could see himself being in real life, like Wyatt Earp or some of those iconic characters from the Old West, because he could really relate to them, I think. So that was fun for him. So.
I have 2 questions backed up, but I've got to ask the quick one. Is that how you got named Wyatt?
Well, that's the rumor. He played the role a couple of years before I was born, and my dad said he always thought it was a great Western name, so I got stuck with it.
Perfect.
And of course, as a kid, all I heard was Wyatt Earp, But as I got older, I thought it's not so bad because people tend to remember it.
Exactly.
When you were a kid, you probably didn't appreciate it.
No, not nearly like I do
You
as an
just
adult.
called
No.
him Dave.
Exactly.
What's
Would
wrong
have been
with
much
Phil?
easier. Yeah. If I could have been Mike, it would have been great.
And the other question
Or
I had-
Bill.
Yeah, or Bill.
but not EJ.
No, you don't want those.
Well, I'm not sure what that stands for.
No one knows.
No one knows. You mentioned your grandfather wanting roles that had sort of a moral message, and that again reminded me of Hart. Now, you were our guest at Silence Under the Stars a couple of years back.
I was, yeah.
Which we were so appreciative of.
It was a lot of fun. It was a great night. Yeah.
And we got to see a video, or a film video, of your grandfather talking about the Hart, in the Hart living room, talking about the place. Do you remember, have any other memories of William S. Hart? I'm kind of Hart-centric, but I have to ask that.
No, and I certainly understand why you are, given where we are. But, I just remember him talking about, the way he spoke about Mr. Hart was with such admiration, and always, you could always tell he was somebody that my grandfather looked up to, but felt like he was very friendly as well. I mean, it was somebody, like I said earlier, that he kind of patterned his style after, and so I think he always really appreciated Bill Hart, in the way they. I think I mentioned to you earlier. I've got before we started the interview, I've got some letters at home that Mr. Hart wrote to my grandfather, which are really cool to read, and kind of in the tone of Mr. Hart saying, it's kind of up to you to carry the torch on now, you young actors, and he had an appreciation for my grandfather, I remember one of those letters kind of referring to, you have the talent to do, what we've been doing all along, but to carry it forward. So,
that's fantastic.
Yeah, so no, they were very close and had a great connection, and I know later my grandfather came up here, and did some of those kind of interviews and kind of helped him. The people that were doing the park or operating the park kind of helped them with a little bit of history of how Bill was and that sort of thing. So
yeah, which your grandfather knew.
Yeah. Well, he knew firsthand. I mean,
firsthand.
He was a visitor at the house, so he knew what it was like when he lived there. So.
Well, Wyatt, this has been a complete thrill for us.
It's been great for me. I really appreciate you guys having me.
We think you kept making the drive over, and we hope to see you over at the ranch here sometime.
Yeah.
Well, I wish you'd come out. Yeah, please do. The ranch is only open at this point when we have a scheduled event or a program. But during the summer, we do movie nights about once a month. I've got a big blow-up screen. We do them outside, kind of like the Silence Under the Stars was. But we show either one of my grandfather's or grandmother's movies, and so that's always a lot of fun. And
is there a website where people can learn what's happening at the park?
You can go to McCreaRanchFoundation.org, and that kind of gives you the history of what we did, and has directions on how you can register for some of the events and that sort of thing.
Oh, good.
So, yeah.
Good.
So
We gotta
it's a
sign
lot
up.
of fun. We have a big fundraising barbecue coming up on May 19th if people are interested.
All right.
So, it's just a lot of fun. Hopefully
We'll
you
check
guys
it
might
out.
be able
Yeah.
to come out. So
There you are.
Oh, that'd be fantastic. Why, before we go, anything
Yeah.
else going on right now that you'd like to that you want to talk about? Or?
You know, my life is pretty busy, but you know, one of the biggest things that's going on right now, I mentioned the bunkhouse earlier, and I started a foundation, the Joel and Frances McCrea Ranch Foundation, to help raise money to restore the infrastructure of the ranch and keep the buildings standing. And we just recently undertook renovation of the bunkhouse, which I mentioned was built in 1890, so it's the oldest building on the ranch and one of the oldest in Thousand Oaks at this point. And so right now it's about 5 feet up in the air while we're putting a concrete foundation under it. So it's really an engineering feat. So,
I bet.
so we're undertaking a lot of those kind of projects, which has been a lot of fun. So,
Well, thank goodness. Clearly, you're a guy that appreciates history, and your family certainly has been a part of history. So.
Well, it was passed down to me. You know, it's something that I think we all should appreciate.
Absolutely.
You can never forget where you came from. You know, that's very important to carry that forward. You know, and especially for the young people today. So,
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, this has been great. Like I said, we've been trying to do this for a long time. Glad we finally got it all worked out. But this has been wonderful for us, and I'm sure for the audience as well.
Well, I
and
hope so.
Thank you very, very much for coming over, and you know, go out to the website, go out to the ranch. When's it open?
Come and visit. We're only open when we have a scheduled
When you have
event
a
or program,
schedule.
but you can see the schedule on the website. So,
Okay.
yeah, McCreaRanchFoundation.org. and it's
McCrea.
MCCREA. You know,
REA ranchfoundation.com?
.org.
.org.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And after you're done there, check out scvinthemovies.com for our little podunk show here.
There you go. Well, once again, thank you, and thank you all watching at home, and we'll be back again soon on SCV in the Movies.